It does remind me a little bit of, it's kind of taken one step back towards banking. I'm not saying this is a criticism, but like today I had to do a bank transfer. I bought a bed of all exciting things.
In Bedford.
I didn't buy a bed in Bedford. I bought a
Okay.
bed in from, I think it was Surrey.
Okay.
But when I put in their details, it asked me a couple of questions. Do you know them? Do you trust this company? Like, it was like a checklist of things they asked me about. Now, they asked me things that you wouldn't do as part of this. They were like, what are you buying? And they wanted to actually know some kind of check the transaction kind of stuff, some KYC, AML kind of questions, like what are you buying? Who's it for? But the first question, I've had it a few times. Do you trust this person? Are these details correct? There's like these little checks in place. And it's just kind of interesting because I'm thinking you're trying to find solutions to the fact that this is we're taking some Bitcoin from trustless to part trusted. But I guess you're saying like you're focused on the people who have no exchanges who've got full trust to be less trustless.
No, this is not about, I mean, some people who, because of the privacy guarantees that you get, will find it, if they're self-custodying, to take, their spending money, and instead of spending it from their own set of private keys and their own wallet, sending it first to a federation and spending it within there, because it will improve their privacy, their personal privacy. So there will be that use case, but that's not our focus. If you see our site, our focus is about the fact that billions of people are either excluded from using either solution, so first-party custody or third-party custody, and the billions who are potentially capable of custodying, most of them are currently destined to be custodying on exchanges. So we're talking about the 90 to 95% who either have no option or it's third-party stranger custody as the option. And from that point of view, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's not about getting the people who have the ability, they have the monetary means, they have the technical means, and they just have the confidence, the self-confidence to self-custody. If you have all three of those, then you should definitely do that. That's the, as I say, that's the Bitcoin standard. That's the gold or the Bitcoin standard. And there are services like Casa, like Unchained, and so on, who, if you have the monetary means and it's a larger amount that you're holding, that can help you and steer you through the path of doing it in a multi-signature manner and make sure that you follow best practice as well. But the idea of, but that's 5, 10, maybe 20% of the market. And we're talking about 80 to 90% of the market, which is currently destined to not have any option at all, or to hold it on an exchange. And this is a step in the right direction. Separately, in terms of checklists, that's just good for anyone. I would suggest, even in a first-party wallet, and you're about to make a payment, it would be good to ask questions, because people, I see it a lot, especially it's still prevalent now, but it was very prevalent a few years ago in parts of West Africa, various scams. There was OneCoin, there was BitConnect, there were a few more, I've lost track of the number, and people would fall for these scams, and some would be storing Bitcoin first party, but if there was a reminder in that app to be careful, does it look like a Ponzi scheme or so on and so forth, that could have helped save people. If people want to turn off those notes and not have them, it's fine. But if we know that these are potential pitfalls or mistakes that people make, the value and benefit of just reminding people to think about these things before doing a transaction it doesn't affect decentralization. That's just about trying to help them in a way which is separate to anything external happening to them. So that way, because you have to remember, one of the most common ways of getting money from people is confidence strictures will not it won't be a technical approach. It will be just, you've built up confidence in me and I'm telling you to do this thing.
Yeah.
If the app says, is anybody telling you to do this thing? Stop. Then that's the final check. And that's probably going to be the most common way most people will be scammed or so on.
It's the trust spectrum is quite interesting because we're talking about some people here trying to get them off exchange and trying to get them to maybe use one of these mints, which kind of makes sense because it's a better scenario. But I could also see a scenario where there are certain exchanges I would perhaps trust than certain mints because the company is so big. So Quadriga obviously put me in a position where I wouldn't trust any small exchange. But the top kind of 3 or 5, like your Coinbase, your Gemini, your Krakens, in some ways, it's not that I don't trust the regulatory bodies around them, force them to confiscate your coins, but I trust them not to fuck up losing my coins, possibly more than I would trust maybe a 2 or 3 federation where I don't know the people. Do you see what I mean? There's like different trust models that go on here.
So I think the first point to say is that there's a spectrum.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Everybody has to make their own decisions. And so if you're in a country which has rule of law, is not managed by dictatorship or authoritarian rule, by the way, you're already now at the minority of the world.
Gladstein would
You're
tell us
now
that.
you're now at the minority of the world, and then you have exchanges that you feel that you can trust, and you're happy to pay the fees for doing that, and they're also happy to have you as a customer as well, because they're regulated entities. So therefore, by definition, they will have a criteria for who cannot join. And by definition, that means some people don't fit the criteria. So you might want to join them. They may not want to have you as a customer. So if you can get through all of those hurdles, and then you're free to make that choice.
I think a mistake I might be making, though, is I'm kind of envisaging this from the privilege of stable Western liberal democracy, where I've got multiple options in terms of kind of exchanges that have built a solid reputation, to multi-sig solutions, to good hardware wallet access, whereas really you're solving a problem for people in much more challenging environments. For me, I see the privacy option is where essentially if I want to send to Danny, I send it into my into the federation and then send from there. That totally makes sense. But I would never keep all my Bitcoin in a federation.
I think people see the value of the privacy value of it, but also people who are currently even in the West, who are in sort of Uncle Jim mode. They're the Bitcoin knowledgeable person within their family, and people are asking them to advise them on Bitcoin, help them buy Bitcoin, help them hold Bitcoin already. Again, people will be doing this in this ad hoc manner. This allows you to do it at least do that in a more better practice manner with lower efforts, because instead of just being called every time they want to spend it, or you can now just set this up, and you can still have the same experience. However, thinking globally, it seems that, and based on feedback, although there's a lot of interest in the West from a privacy point of view, there's a huge amount of interest from the global South, and that's an area where, right from the day one of starting at CoinFloor, has been an area of interest for me in terms of Latin America, Middle East, Africa, of course, and also we're seeing a lot of interest in post-Soviet Europe as well, and these parts of the world where for monetary reasons, or they're in areas of conflict, they're suffering under the yoke of authoritarian regimes and dictatorships. And this is, again, more than half the world. Billions of people we're talking about. They don't have those options. They often suffer under, we're talking about 10% inflation. Venezuela's 20,000% inflation. Currency controls, a lack of options for alternatives. They don't always, again, location is dependent, but some of these have very few. They're either unbanked or underbanked, as Andreas would say. And so we're talking about billions there. And if we help those billions, we've already won. But but this is a global product, and different people, it's like a hammer. Different people will use the hammer to build a boat, a house, or or a piece of art, but it's a tool that can be used in different configurations.
Do I seem to be overly grilling you on this particular subject, or has this come up quite a bit?
Which subject?
The idea that there is a trust model based around the fact that people could collude.
I think it comes up a lot. I think it comes up because most of the audience and the places that we're talking to are from the global north or the west. And so there, people really grill this, the idea of for second party trust seems to be unusual. Although then when you say the Uncle Jim model, most people know either themselves without realizing it or know someone who is advising on Bitcoin or helping people buy Bitcoin or holding Bitcoin on behalf of friends and family. But there is this sort of disconnect between, even though they might be doing it themselves, believing that they won't be able to trust so other people are trusting them, but believing that it's going to be hard to find people who can trust a friend or family, even though they are being trusted at the very same time.
Well, we've seen lawsuits in the UK where people have colluded on wills to try and steal. So even within family groups, there are trust issues.
No, trust issues can happen, but ultimately, the solution is we've got the ability to trust within family, or you have to trust a stranger, and which is what's the current option. And because the stranger is able to provide a flashy website, great advertising, great marketing, press a number of social buttons and UX buttons to make you feel safe, it doesn't change the fact that they could become a Krojiga, they can become, we've seen recently many recent examples of regulated institutions breaking their customers' trust. So it's a question of trade-offs. The ultimate and ideal is for people to self-custody. And again, as part of the education and training within the app, above a certain level, we not only would say, not only this federation is becoming quite large in terms of the Bitcoin it's holding, maybe consider moving or splitting to reduce your risk. The app could also say, your amount of Bitcoin you're holding is becoming quite large. Maybe you should consider self-custody without realizing it. Because again, people don't realize when they go from, this is a small amount, then it goes up 10x. And so again, it's a bit like a computer game. Again, so depending on the age of the audience.
The one which want to go with it.
Yeah. Nowadays, when there was a game called Budokan, the way of karate. And what would happen in this game is,
Hold on.
It was this great game, but this is like the 90s or early 2000s.
Danny, try and find a screenshot for me.
Budokan, and Budokan.
It's just like Spectrum.
It would be something like that.
BBC.
It's sort of pre-Prince of Persia sort of stuff. But in that game, I remember buying this game, like rushing to buy this game. And it had this manual, and the manual was like this thick. It was a book. It was like 80, 90 pages long, and all these moves and so on. And you sort of read the first few pages, and then you just gave it. That's the one.
Oh my
Budokan, the martial spirit. That's it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just remember that the manual was just like this tome that you had to read, and it was probably one of the last ones in my mind of games where I read the manual, because there was so many different moves. And now with modern games, what would happen is they, instead of giving you all of this book to read and then you play the game, the first few levels of the game were the instructions. And now there's either no instructions or just a pamphlet. And it's the same with modern electronics. They try to bake it into the process. Because the understanding is that you've got, for people to educate people, you don't want to tell them to go off to this separate thing. And but you want to bake it into the process. And so, and that's what leads to the best practice and the best results. So a part of what we're doing is not just, as I say, we're thinking about it holistically. It's not just incredible form of privacy, this form of decentralized custody, but it's also this vision of we're trying to deal with the problem end to end, the way Apple and with the iPhone tried to deal with the problem of people being able to communicate end to end. So it's not just the phone; it was the stores, it was the online app store as well. So we'll be looking at how do we get people to be hyper-Bitcoinized. Lightning, Bitcoin, and custody is part of it, as is the end-to-end process of what are their daily lived-in experience and need for money. So remittance, make that easier, or to earn money, make that easier, and so on. But also education and best practice, we think, will be to bake that into the app as well. So there will be a time when you get above a certain value that it makes sense to self-custody. And it shouldn't just be us. We think it makes sense in the app to start saying, well, maybe you should think about self-custodying, even helping them to get to that process. So, yeah.
I feel like you were trying to jump in a couple of times there.
No.
You should be louder, man. Just say, shut the fuck up, Pete.
I was just wondering if there's like a physical security issue where if the guardians have to be or don't have to be, but are largely public figures, and they're, say it's a 3 or 5 guardianship, you could use like Bitcoin podcast as an example. So it could be like Stefan, Peter, Matt Odell, Marty Bent, Daniel Prince, let's say. You got a 3 of 5. Does a $5 wrench attack become a $15 wrench attack when one federation controls a fair amount of money? Is there a physical threat to those people gardening it? Gardening?
Not gardening.
Gardening. I like that. Gardening the federation. So I guess it depends on the context, and it depends on, for example, if it's a regime that can be violent and so on, the risk is higher or lower. If you're already public figures, there's already a risk you're taking on because people are going to be aware that you're in the space and they're going to make assumptions anyway. One thing to remember is that guardians do not need to be physically connected with the community. They just need to be connected from a relationship point of view. So let's take the scenario where you have a family and some are in the diaspora and they're often sending money home to relatives abroad. And there's a village with many people who are based, who are the recipients. And that village might be in a place which is actually not necessarily safe to be a guardian. But the diaspora, members of the diaspora could be the guardians who are in New York and London. And they're often sending large parts of their paycheck back to the people back in the village. It's a very common scenario. So if they're already giving large parts of their money to the federation, to the village or to the relatives abroad, it seems that you could probably trust them to custody the money that they've been spending and giving as well. But also it means that their location is physically separate to where most of the money is being used. The other thing is, because of the way of the sort of peer-to-peer nature of how federations are formed, outside of the federation, there's no reason for anyone else outside of the federation, unless you publicly announce that I've got this federation, to ever know about it. Okay. Because you have a group of people who say, we want to set up a federation, the village will then say, okay, these people could be, again, they could be in the West, for example, because that's where they're working and earning, for example. They set up the federation, or they could be in the same place. And then people will join on a person-to-person basis, scan their QR code. And they have sort of no incentive to tell anyone else that they're part of a federation. It looks like a wallet app. It acts like a wallet app on chain. It appears like a wallet. And you're getting benefit. It doesn't benefit you to tell people that you're using it as a part of a federation or who the guardians are.